Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going to take a look at one of the most consequential figures of the early 20th century. As a matter of fact, you could say that he actually led America onto the world stage. And he showed the world what could be accomplished by a free and democratic society once sufficiently aroused. I'm talking about John Joseph Blackjack Pershing, General Pershing to you and I. You know, before Pershing, America was viewed as a novelty, a wealthy but isolated society that might produce and steal, even washing machines, but was fundamentally unserious. After Pershing, it could only be viewed as a legitimate world power by anyone who's paying attention. And you know, Pershing was the embodiment of that process, of that transition. What a life he led. He fought in the Indian Wars on the Great Plains. He fought in Cuba. He fought in the Philippines. Heck, he even chased Pancho Villa around Mexico. He'd suffer tremendous personal tragedy and recover to lead his nation's army in the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. He's born in Missouri to a regular family in 1880. House has no electricity because, you know, no house had electricity in 1880. He'd be part of that generation that would see more material change in their lifetime than any generation before or since. He'd see the advent of the electric light, the telephone, the automobile, the airplane, television, radio, heck, even nuclear weapons, jet airplanes, and computers. And throughout that time, he would go toe-to-toe with the greatest military and political leaders of the old world and more than hold his own. Let's get into the action and see what John Pershing is all about. One of the things you've got to realize is that newspapers of the time in 1880s, 1890s, well, everything was news. They'd cover everything from garden parties to world wars. This particular article would appear every year in newspapers across the country. The New York Times, Saturday, April 8, 1882, National Capital Topics, West Point appointments, a list of the cadets thus far selected in the various states, and they would list them all. And if you go down to Missouri, 7 names in, you get John J. Pershing. Now, why did Pershing want to attend the military academy? Well, it's simple. It was free. He wanted a university education. He was a smart guy. He passed the tests, and he gets in. But he gets in, if you check his age, he's 22 years old when he begins his education. He's already 3 or 4 years behind everybody else, but he's not going to let that stop him. When he graduates, his first posting is out west, as most men at that time would be. He's assigned to the 6th Cavalry, Fort Meade, South Dakota. He takes part in the Lakota Sioux Wars. He's not there for the Wounded Knee Massacre. He's actually only a few miles away, engaged against a fellow by the name of Chief War Eagle, who's attacking his supply wagons. There's a bitter exchange. He's able to drive War Eagle off, and that's one of the last battles on the Great Plains, what was referred to at the time the Ghost Dance campaign. He's brought a little ways back east in 1891 when he's assigned to be a professor of military science and tactics at the University of Nebraska. That was a common thing, thing to do to be assigned a teaching position if there's no active conflict at the time. And here's the article announcing that. The Moorhead Daily News, August 13th, 1891. Professor of Military Science, by direction of the President, 2nd Lieutenant John J. Pershing, 6th Cavalry, has been detailed as Professor of Military Science and Tactics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. You know, throughout the research that we've put in here about Pershing, there's an overwhelming bias that he's a disciplinarian and not liked by his fellow soldiers. But yet, in going through the actual newspaper articles of the time, that's not borne out. This is a typical article. This is the Omaha Evening Bee, Omaha, Nebraska, February 20th, 1892. University cadets want to compete. Lieutenant John J. Pershing, military instructor in the state university, was in the city today trying to make arrangements for entering a crack company of university cadets at the National Competitive Drill, which takes place here next June. The major says if his company is admitted, the university boys will set up a great drill. The crack companies from the east will have to hustle if they want to carry off honors from the varsity cadets. And that cadet team he put together was known as the Pershing Rifles, and it still exists. It's now a national organization, and in fact is the oldest continuously operating drill unit in America. While he's teaching, he's still part of the regular military, and he gets an assignment that's going to basically change his life. Here we have the Baltimore Sun, November 12th, 1892. It says here, the following assignments to regiments of officers recently promoted or ordered. First Lieutenant John J. Pershing to the 10th Cavalry, Troop L. And why is that important? Well, the 10th Cavalry are the Buffalo Soldiers. It's an entirely black unit with white officers. And in fact, that leads to his nickname. But his nickname, and politically correct, a warning out there, folks, he wasn't known as Blackjack Pershing initially. He was known as the N-word Pershing. That, even by the standards of the 1890s, that was a bit much, and so by 1900 it gets softened to Blackjack Pershing. But it would stay, that epithet would stay with him for the rest of his life, and it was always viewed negatively in the military, that moniker. The public, I think, just took it as a sign of basically a sign of a military strength. That's certainly how I always took it when I heard Blackjack Pershing, but that's where the name comes from. While he's at the University of Nebraska, he puts in enough time and effort to actually get his law degree. Here we have the Nebraska Legal News, July 10th, 1893. It says here that Charles Grimes of Cass County and John J. Pershing of Lancaster County have been admitted to the practice in the Supreme Court. So he's now a lawyer. He'd be using those skills in just a little bit out on the plains. Never practiced in private practice, but the little skills came in handy. Here's another thing. If you were such an unliked human being, as there's a lot of that in the Pershing story, would this happen to you? Here we are, the Lincoln Weekly Call, Lincoln, Nebraska, October 4, 1895. Farewell reception. Lieutenant John J. Pershing's friends assembled to bid him goodbye. The farewell reception tendered John J. Pershing, who leaves this week to rejoin his regiment, the 10th Cavalry, was a credit to its promoters and one which Mr. Pershing will not soon forget. The reception took place in Reception Hall. By 8:30 p.m., several hundred young people dressed in their most charming costumes had gathered in the large hall and passed down the review line. About 9 o'clock, the university orchestra, seated around the speaker and clerk's desk, struck up popular dancing music, and the rest of the evening was spent in that oft-indulged amusement. Sounds like everybody had a bang-up time. I don't know if you'd be doing that if you didn't like the gentleman. Now he leaves Nebraska and he's going out west. But look how things, through the next few articles, look how the world has changed in just these 6 years. How the Lakota Sioux are being dealt with militarily in 1890, but here we are in 1896. The Anaconda Standard, views from the fort, and the fort is Fort Assiniboine, says here, Troop D, 10th U.S. Cavalry, under command of Lieutenant John J. Pershing, left this garrison at 2 o'clock this afternoon with full field equipment and orders to proceed to Great Falls, Montana, and there await further instructions. What were they going to Great Falls, Montana for? Well, they were there because of the Cree. The Cree were a Canadian tribe that had come down into Montana years before and had been allowed to roam at will throughout Montana. And the federal government I guess they had had enough and they wanted to regularize the situation. So, in what was their orders? It says here, the military authorities give out no information regarding the exact line of policy to be pursued, but it begins to look very much like a farewell for the Canadian renegades. Well, are they going to round them up? Are they going to massacre? No, this is better than that. Headline, holding a powwow. Army officers go this afternoon to the Cree camp. Troop D Colored 10th Cavalry, U.S., arrived in the city last evening at 8 o'clock and camped near the Black Eagle Pavilion. Their mission is the deportation of the Crees. But how are they going to do it? Are we going to do it like General Custer? Not a chance. A powwow was arranged this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Judge Hoffman and clerk being present as counsel for the Crees. The Crees now have lawyers. The matter was laid before them, and their side of the story and what they wanted was being told. They are not anxious to go and claim that among their number are many children born here who are subject to protection. We've got that birthright citizenship issue. This is 1896, not 2025, but they're having the same issue here. If children were born while they're roaming around Montana, aren't they U.S. citizens? Well, let's see if they are. Headline in the Great Falls Tribune, June 19th, 1896. The Crees are under arrest. Cavalry troops surround the camps of the Indians west of the Sail. Indians ordered not to pass the line. So who does the American military bring forward to argue their case? Well, Pershing, of course. Then Lieutenant Pershing made his talk to the Indians through an interpreter. He said in substance that he came there under orders from the Great Father at Washington, I guess that's how they talked back then, as a friend and with intent to act in a friendly manner with them. He wanted them to keep together and he would furnish them with rations until such time as they were transported to Canada. We're all with you as long as you get the heck out of here. If any of them had acquired any rights here, they could obtain them through the civil courts, and he felt sure no one would wish to deprive them of any rights that they had. So they're on the side. Follow the rules. If you've gained citizenship through any action, you can appeal that through the courts. The Indians obeyed the orders, but they have, get a load of this, they have consulted attorneys, and it is expected that today in the district court application on behalf of all the prisoners for a writ of habeas corpus will be made. It is being contended that the Indians have violated no law and they have not been arrested under due process of law. So now instead of bullets, we've got the lawyers involved. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Oh, it's probably a good thing. It's much more civilized. But it just shows you, that's the transition, 1890 to 1910. The world's moving. What was acceptable 20 years before is no longer acceptable. And that's sort of the problem you get into when you start judging people by their actions from prior centuries. What was absolutely normal and right in 1 year, 20 years later can be viewed as a war crime. So everyone keep that in mind. World moves on though, and in 1898, somebody put some explosives on the Maine, USS Maine, and it blows up in Havana Harbor. And here's what you get: Chattanooga Daily News, April 21, 1898. The Spanish-American War has begun. The American squadron sails from Key West to at once blockade the city of Havana. The squadron's in Key West. The Margaritaville campaign, I guess. They're sending the ships from Key West down there. And what happens to our man Pershing? Well, it says here in the Chattanooga, in the same article, that First Lieutenant John J. Pershing, 10th Cavalry, is temporarily relieved from duty at the Military Academy, West Point, and will join his troop. He'd been teaching there for about a year, and he's being sent down to Havana now. And it's going to see let's see what's happening in Cuba. One of the things, how many men, what's it going to take? Remember, the U.S. military is tiny at this point in time. 50,000 men, maybe. The president will at once issue call for 100,000 troops, 80,000 of whom will go to Cuba. He's going to triple the size of the American military. And that's going to require that, well, everyone in the normal military is going to get a promotion. These are these brevet promotions. If you triple the size of the military, you got to find officers. And so everyone who was once a lieutenant is going to be a captain. If you were a captain, you're going to be a lieutenant colonel. Everyone gets promotions as they try to find enough officers to train the new recruits. And so what happens to our man? He was a lieutenant. He's now Major of Volunteers. Promotion for Lieutenant John J. Pershing of the 10th Cavalry. It says here, Lieutenant John J. Pershing, 10th Cavalry, has been promoted to be a Major of Volunteers. Lieutenant Pershing was highly commended in the report of General Wood for gallantry and courage in the Battle of El Caney in Cuba. He had previous fighting experience, having been with General Mills in the Wounded Knee fighting campaign in South Dakota. So Pershing's off to Cuba. And what kind of fighting's going on in Cuba? What's it like there? We know exactly what it's like because he writes a letter to the Lincoln Journal-Star, back to Lincoln, Nebraska, where he has many friends. And here's how he describes the fighting in Cuba. We've had lots of fighting since I last wrote, but we came off victorious. The 10th are born fighters. We lost 50% of the officers engaged and 18% of the entire regiment. War is simply terrible. There were 200 killed on our side and 1,300 wounded. The field hospital was a fearful place, but one gets accustomed to it. All my men were brave as lions. Even those wounded fought until they could fight no longer. Well, war is all hell, isn't it here? Pershing would go on. He'd fight at Kettle and San Juan Hills in Cuba, where he'd get the attention of Theodore Roosevelt, who was leading the Rough Riders down there. And Roosevelt had this to say about Pershing. Said that he is the coolest man under fire I ever saw in my life. And another officer noted that he was as cool as a bowl of cracked ice. He gained quite a reputation as a fighting soldier in the Cuban campaign. The war would switch as part of that conflict. The United States ends up with the Philippines, whether they want it or not. He's transferred out to the Philippines because there's insurgent native tribes are rebelling against American rule, and that goes on through 1899. He's made the commandant of a military district there. It's noted that he has a wonderful rapport with the insurgent tribes. He gets along well with minorities, just as he did with the Buffalo Soldiers. It becomes a sort of a hallmark of his career. But the war in the Philippines was serious as well. And here's an article from the Clyde Enterprise, Clyde, Ohio, February 9th, 1899. War between the United States troops and the Filipinos began at Manila last Saturday. Several of the insurgents persisted in breaking through the American lines when our sentries fired, killing one of them. This was the signal for a battle which lasted until nightfall and all next day, in which about 250 Americans were killed and wounded and about 4,000 Filipinos killed, wounded, and captured. Says here, the natives attacked with great courage, many of them using bows and arrows, but some being armed with Mauser rifles and having rapid-fire guns. Says that this outbreak at this time, when the peace treaty was about being ratified, and when everything indicated an early settlement of Philippine affairs in a manner satisfactory to all, is greatly to be deplored. So I guess they got close to having a treaty that would have worked. They couldn't, and they fought. And so he's in the Philippines. Pershing will spend much of the next 15 years in and out of the Philippines. He's transferred in 1899 to the staff of General Otis, who's running the show out of Manila. And for some reason, he's subject of several puff pieces. I don't know why this is even necessary, but they're in here. Here's the article from the Brookfield Gazette, Brookfield, Missouri, September 2, 1899. It says here, a good military record. Major John J. Pershing of the U.S. Army complimented. It says here that almost from the commencement of his military service, Major Pershing's career has been brilliant. Under General Wesley Merritt, he held the rank of senior cadet captain at the military academy, and that distinguished officer has since taken occasion to pay him this tribute. He gave every promise then of becoming the superb officer he is now known to be. He was earnest, ambitious, energetic, and manly in an eminent degree. That's like something your mother would write for you. But anyways, that's what he was thought of in 1899. He bounces around. Well, he's assigned to various duties in the Far East in the early 1900s. He's an observer in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, when the Japanese kicked the bejabbers out of the Russians. And then he's transferred to Tokyo. Here we go, January 7th, 1905. New Tokyo attaché, well-known officer. Captain John J. Pershing made record in Philippines. It says here, Captain John J. Pershing of the 15th Cavalry, who has just been detailed by the War Department as military attaché at Tokyo, is one of the best-known officers of the United States Army. Captain Pershing's career has been a singularly brilliant one. His mother must be writing this article as well. Public attention being attracted to him by his daring deeds in the Philippines. As a result, he became nearly as great a hero as General so-and-so and many of the other heroes. So he's getting good press. He's getting good assignments. It's 1905 and he's in Tokyo. But you know what? That doesn't mean everything's smooth sailing. There are some accusations. It says here, Washington Post, many affidavits prove Pershing charges false. What charges? Well, I guess I'll use the technical terms. He's accused of, well, I think the term is shacking up with a native woman and fathering one or two of her children. The War Department goes right to the top, and Taft, the future President Taft, is assigned to investigate. And after a thorough year-long investigation, they come to the conclusion that there's no merit at all to the charges, and it was done just to smear him. But he had to go through that, and it became part of the public record. Around that same time, though, he does something that's going to help his career more than just about anything possibly could. Well, I'll leave it for this, and I'll do the article first. Free Press, December 26, 1905. Pershing for brigadier. The captain may be jumped over other officers. Did you see that? A captain becoming a brigadier general. At the time in the American military, promotions were almost always based on seniority. If you were a total screw-up, it might delay your promotion. And if you were the world's greatest soldier, if you were Caesar, you might be able to be promoted one level further. But promotions where you're going up 3 or 4 levels are absolutely unheard of, unless in 1905 you happen to marry the daughter of the senator for Wyoming. And when you realize that all military promotions must be approved by the U.S. Senate, well, there we go. It says here, this would jump him over the heads of several hundred, and it's over 800 officers, and it would be certain to result in stirring up of the entire army. But not when you've married the daughter of Senator Warren of Wyoming, who is not just in the Senate, but chairman of the Senate Military Committee. So he's the guy that approves promotions. So up our man goes from captain to brigadier general. It was a good promotion. He is a good soldier. But sometimes it's better to know people than to be just a great soldier. Now, his next appointment, he's coming back home. He's coming to San Francisco. It says here in the Oakland Inquirer, December 24th, 1913, former commander in the Philippines coming to coast. General John J. Pershing to assume command of the 8th Brigade at the Presidio. Presidio is the military camp outside of San Francisco. So he's going to come in. He's come back home as a brigadier general. He's married. By 1915, he's got 4 beautiful children, 3 girls and a boy. And he's not home. In 1915, he's transferred to Fort Bliss, Texas. Why would he go to Fort Bliss, Texas? Because, well, Mexico is in the middle of one of their perpetual revolutions. They're always in a revolution. 1910 is when this one starts. By 1915, everything's going crazy. Pancho Villa is riding up and down, and they're afraid that Pancho Villa and his associates are going to cross into the United States and raid U.S. cities in search of supplies. And while he's away, his wife and children remain at the base at the Presidio, when a lamp tips over and ignites a newly lacquered floor in their unit. And it says here, the Ogden Examiner, September 1st, 1915, Mrs. Pershing, with 3 of her 4 children, was burned to death in her quarters at the Army post in the Presidio at San Francisco on Friday of last week when a lamp exploded. The children whose lives were lost were Helen, Anne, and Margaret, aged 8, 6, and 5. Tragically, Warren Pershing, 5 years old, the son, was found wandering about in the smoke and rescued. He loses everybody with a touching photograph here. He loses, 4/5 of his family. And maybe that can account for some of his meanness, and if in fact it existed over the next few years. But I certainly wouldn't want to be going up against a man who just had this level of personal tragedy. But he recovers, or he does his best to recover. And in March 1st, 1916, he's such a noted figure in the military that the New York Times actually asks for his opinion about military matters, and he gives it. Headline: Pershing states views on preparedness plans. Says here, Brigadier General John J. Pershing, former commander of cadets at the University of Nebraska and now in command of the troops in the El Paso district, in a signed article published recently in the New York Times, advocates adopting the policy of universal training as the first step towards preparedness. So he's all in for the draft. It is noted that it is exceedingly improbable, he writes, that any method of recruitment dependent upon voluntary enlistment alone will ever supply our armies with the number of men either trained or untrained required to carry on a great war. So he's going out as a spokesman for the military, saying that, remember, this is 1916, and the war's been raging in Europe for 2 years. Better get ready. We don't know. We don't want to be part of it, but if we get dragged into this thing, get ready. We're going to need the draft, because we're going to have to raise incredible numbers of troops. But before that happens, Pershing's still on the lookout on the southern border. You think we got border problems now? Here's the article, the Bakersfield, Californian, Monday, March 6, 1916. American troops look out for Villa. It says here that Gabriel Gravira, Commandant at War, has announced today he had requested Brigadier General John Pershing at El Paso to have American troops west of El Paso keep a sharp lookout for Francesco Villa. Viro expressed the opinion that Villa was headed toward the border with the intention of seeking refuge in the United States. And it turns out he was seeking a lot more than refuge. There's a raid led by Pancho Villa. And here's the headlines. Akron Beacon Journal, Thursday, March 9th, 1916, Mexican raiders kill 7. Attack town of Columbus, New Mexico. We hear that Villa was in personal command. 3 soldiers are among dead. Mexicans put to flight after a battle lasting for an hour. 4 American civilians and 3 soldiers of the 13th U.S. Cavalry were killed in a battle between American troops and Villa forces who attacked the town of Columbus, New Mexico shortly after dawn Thursday, according to an official report received by Brigadier General John J. Pershing. And get a load of this. What do you think the reaction would be to this? 3 hanged, bodies burned. Arthur McKinney, William Corbett, and James O'Neill, who were captured by General Villa, were hanged and their bodies burned, according to a dispatch received here Thursday. The modern response to something like that would be anything just short of nuclear. And maybe not even short of nuclear. But what does the United States do at the time? Well, on March 15, 1916, they assigned General Pershing to lead a punitive expedition into Mexico to try to capture or kill Pancho Villa. They assigned 10,000 men to the job. And let's see what happens here. We have an article, the Baltimore Sun, Friday, March 10th, 1916. Scene of border trouble and men fighting in it. They got a classic picture of Pancho Villa and his men, and they look like something out of Central Casting. Absolutely Central Casting. They look like the classical Mexican bandits / vigilantes here. And then who's opposing them? John J. Pershing and General Frederick Funsta. They're the ones that are going to be heading into Mexico. And they're going to make it a sort of a modern campaign. It's going to be motorized. Cars, trucks, motorcycles. Heck, they're even going to use airplanes for reconnaissance. Most of that's going to go sideways. There's going to be plane crashes. And, well, here's the articles. Villa flees before U.S. troops. Pershing establishes new base. Chase for Villa in Chihuahua. And that's from the Dwight Star and Herald of April 1st, 1916. From San Francisco Chronicle, April 12th, 1916. First pictures from the front passed by Army censor. It's a wonderful picture of General Pershing in his Wild Bunch outfit here. What I want to draw your attention to, you can see Pershing there in the middle, but to his left, our right, you recognize that gentleman? Well, that's George S. Patton, a lieutenant at the time, but, well, he'll be the general by the next World War. That's who's fighting in Mexico. Well, they chase Villa all around northern Mexico. They defeat his troops, but they can't find Villa. And eventually the U.S. government tires of wasting all that money on this particular cause, and the troops are retired back into the United States. The Germans, can't leave well enough alone. And after a year or so of unrelenting submarine warfare, and after the crazy Zimmerman telegram that's sent to the Mexican consulate trying to get Mexico to join the war in Europe on the side of the Germans, President Wilson has had enough, and it's decided that the United States is finally going to enter the war. Well, what's going to happen to General Pershing? Well, according to the Brooklyn Eagle, Saturday, May 19th, 1917, Major General Pershing to lead troops abroad. Got a lovely picture of Pershing in there. He's the one on the right, not the Beagle on the left. The Washington Post of Saturday, May 19th states, Pershing to lead U.S. forces to France. Draft registration is set for June, so the draft's coming in. How many men is Wilson going to send into the fray? Well, 2 million. He's authorized the enlistment of 2 million men. He's federalized the National Guard, and the draft is being put into play. Now, as I mentioned before, the United States doesn't have a military to do this sort of thing. They've got 50,000 people or so in the military. They're all of a sudden going to go to 2 million. The easy thing is drafting the people, giving them some uniforms, giving them a gun. But that doesn't make them soldiers. That makes them a mob. They have to be trained. And they have to be trained by officers. A couple of things here. You ever wonder why it took a full year or longer after war was declared to get a significant amount of American troops into Europe? It's because of those issues. The men need to be trained by officers. The officers don't exist. I didn't appreciate the sheer volume of officers that are required. I've back-engineered this thing. This is what's required for 2 million men in a modern army. The fellows that know the most about what's going on in the military are the sergeants. Half the time, they're the only guys that have a clue what's going on. But where do you find trained sergeants? You're going to need, and I'm not making this up, 80,000 sergeants. They're in charge of squads. You're going to need 40,000 lieutenants that are in charge of platoons. You're going to need 5,000 captains and 5,000 majors because they run companies. You're going to need 2,000 lieutenant colonels. How do you find a lieutenant colonel? How do you find 2,000 of them? You need 1,000 full-blown colonels because they run regiments. You're going to need 400 brigadier generals because they run brigades, 140 lieutenant generals because they run divisions, and 20 full generals because they run corps. 100,000 men in a corps, you got to have 20 and 2 million. It's an incredible amount of officers. So everyone's getting promotions, multiple promotions. Pershing goes from a brigadier general to a 4-star general. He's promoted. Everyone else follows him up the chain, and they have to recruit fellows that were the sergeants are suddenly commissioned officers. There's nowhere else to get them in. That doesn't mean that everything you read in the newspaper, though, is serious. This is an article in the Brooklyn Eagle, May 5th, 1918. I'll refer to this is kind of my Sergeant York article here. Get a load of this. May use shotguns to bag grenades. Trap shooters may be used in frontline trenches to explode Hun bombs. Pershing makes the comment, I want every American soldier to be able to shoot, and they run with that. Somebody runs with that and says that, yeah, the grenades that they're tossing in, why don't we just have trap shooters in the trenches use their shotguns to shoot them out of the air? That's about as lunatic a suggestion as I've ever heard. The United States will use shotguns, though, in World War. They're going to use shotguns, and those shotguns are going to terrify the German troops as they're the ultimate trench clearing weapon. As a matter of fact, the Germans will actually bring a protest and try to declare shotguns, the use of shotguns as a war crime. The guys who invented the use of gas. But anyways, they're going to use shotguns, but they're not going to use them to shoot grenades out of the air. This is what I'm talking about when General Pershing embodies the transition of the U.S. from a regional to an international power. Article, Brooklyn Eagle, Brooklyn, New York, April 4th, 1918. Headline, The Two Men on the Western Front in Whom America is Most Interested, Foch and Pershing. Shows him standing toe-to-toe with General Foch. There's another good photograph with Foch, Petain, General Haig from England, and Pershing. And Pershing looks the most military of all of them. And, he's really an example of the power and vitality of America compared with, especially by 1918, of the decline and weakness of the traditional European powers. Again, not everything that goes on in a world war is serious. But this is serious to a small degree. Here we go. The Washington Post, Friday, May 10th. General Pershing asks boys to write their mothers. Mother's Day. With the American Army in France, John J. Pershing has issued the following order to all units of the American Expeditionary Forces in France. To all commanding officers, I wish every officer and soldier in the American Expeditionary Force to write a letter home on Mother's Day. This is a little thing for each one to do, but these letters will carry back our courage and our affection to the patriotic women whose love and prayer inspire us and cheer us on to victory. Write your mom. As I mentioned, Pershing at this point has been promoted to a full 4-star general. He's the first 4-star general in the American military since Phil Sheridan, and he's given virtual autonomy over the American forces. Nobody since Grant was granted that kind of power by Lincoln has there been an officer with that level of control. Pershing is adamant about several things here. He's insistent that Americans serve in America and primarily under American officers. He doesn't want the men, doesn't want the units chopped up piecemeal and serve under British officers as just part of the British force. He wants to wait until he has sufficient forces led by American officers so that they can go into battle together. One thing he's always had a lookout for the black soldier. And while he doesn't have the political power to integrate the U.S. Army. What he does do, he lends out the 92nd and 93rd Black Infantry Divisions and sends them over to the French. And this is one time he does allow his Americans to serve under foreign officers. He assigns them to the French, and the 92nd and 93rd are actually the first American units that see action in France, and they will serve under French commanders until the end of the war. If Pershing is criticized over anything, it's that he doesn't follow the example of French and English with respect to offensive attacks. He prefers frontal assaults with limited artillery, and that does lead to more casualties than he might have, but he suffers from that typical American disease, but condition. He's impatient. He wants results now, and if you look at his units are assigned into the front. He starts in great measure right around the beginning of the 100 Days. The 100 Days begins when that great spring offensive crashes into France by the Germans, crashes into France and is finally stopped. And then the counterattack for 3.5 months pushes the Germans all the way back almost to the German border. But that sets up the November 11th armistice, and it's Pershing, to a large part, it's the Americans with Pershing leading the way through the 100 Days in an aggressive manner that does great credit to the American forces. They do suffer large casualties for the period of time, and casualties that today just frankly wouldn't be accepted. But this is a changing world, and it's 1918, not 2025. Back home, he remains incredibly popular. Here's an article that was published just after the end of the war on November 19th, 1918, by the Evening Sun in Baltimore. Pershing's drive to Sedan, now recognized as best executed of whole war. Early criticism completely silenced. Americans in Paris feel Wilson shortened the conflict. Masses of allies with him in policy of restraining passionate engendered. There's a realization that his aggressiveness, while it led to higher casualties, might also have caused the war to end sooner. It's something that can be weighed in the balance, and certainly nothing you should be overly criticized for. What he can be criticized for is 2 times that he spoke out. He spoke out, well, perhaps exceeded what a general should do. First off, he speaks out against the concept of an armistice itself. It's his opinion that in order for the war to end properly, you've got to fight right into Germany. You have to show the German people that their troops have well and truly been defeated on the battlefield, and you have to gain their submission that way. By doing an armistice, while Germany is still in control of all their borders, is going to lead inevitably to refighting the same issues again, which is exactly what happened. But it's not the position of a military commander to make those statements and to criticize what his commander-in-chief, his policies are. And he realizes that, and he apologizes to Wilson. One of the other things he criticized, well, he did the whole concept of the armistice he's against, and he doesn't know whether the Germans are serious about the armistice or whether it's just a ploy. So he gets criticized because he keeps his men, well, in boxing, he fights to the bell. He fights to the last whistle. He's engaged. He continues to engage in offensive maneuvers right up to 11 p.m. on November 11th. He's criticized because there are 3,000 or 4,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and captured during that period of time. But he felt it was in the best interest of the army, and he was, while investigating, he was never overtly criticized. He was never sanctioned for doing that type of action. It was probably the prudent thing to do at the time. So the war ends, but that doesn't mean he's coming home. The powers that be don't trust the Germans either. Remember, the Germans, Germany at the time, they're going through all kinds of turmoil with communists and fascists and God knows what else. The situation in Germany is very unstable. And so here we have an article from the Argus Leader, December 3rd, 1918. Ultimatum is handed to Germany by the Allies, General Pershing, to keep army of 1.25 million over there. Got to try to keep the peace, got to keep the pressure on so that the terms of the armistice can be enacted and we can have some kind of transition to regular government. Well, it worked. That part of it works itself out and he eventually comes home. Someone enters the scene now. There's a woman enters the scene now. And, well, let's have a look at what this is all about. The New York Times, Sunday, March 19th, 1922. Madame Micheline Resco of Paris, she's actually Romanian, chosen by General Pershing to paint the portrait of himself to be the principal American exhibit in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, the gift of the Knights of Columbus in the name of the American public to the Fine Arts Ministry of France. So this woman, attractive young woman, is going to paint his portrait and it's going to hang in the gallery. Well, would you like to know that he actually met her 4 years before in 1918? And he may have been more than a little familiar with her. And they certainly carried on correspondence of a romantic nature throughout the war and after the war. Should have a picture of her picture. The one she painted somewhere. Well, Pershing finally retires. He left in charge of the army until 1924, and he retires. The Brooklyn Eagle, September 13th, 1924. Pershing, who retires today, and his successor, General Hines. Coolidge thanks Pershing for nation as general quits after 42 years of service. You know, he was a pretty good job running the army. It paid $10,000 a year, which is a $300,000 a year job. And considering you don't have any expenses above and beyond that, and you get a wonderful pension, he was well taken care of. He sets to work writing his memoirs, and by 1931, he's ready to publish them. And in 1932, those memoirs win the Pulitzer Prize. Here's an article from the Brooklyn Eagle. Obvious but sound, who said, saying he was the obvious choice, but a sound choice. It says here, General Pershing was what might be called a natural as a Pulitzer Prize recipient. His My Experience in the World War was by far the most important history written by an American in 1931. The fact remains that General Pershing's memoir automatically became a source book for historians upon its publication. It fits upon the bookshelf of the nation. It is the testimony of our commander in the field. As such, it is a historic document, and the judges would have been exceedingly blind to have passed it by as they sorted out the year's endeavors in history. So he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. He's a great friend of Britain throughout the 1930s and into 1940. He supports Roosevelt's actions with respect to the destroyer for bases. 50 destroyers for the right to have bases around the world. The Americans get the right to bases, including bases like Bermuda. His health begins to fail, though, in the mid-1940s, and on July 15, 1948, it's announced, General Pershing, World War I chief, dies. Truman and Marshall lead Pershing tributes, and he's given an amazing state funeral and all the recognition he deserves. Now, there's a couple. We're basically done our story, but there's a little bit of housekeeping that needs to be undertaken here. There's a couple of women we've got to deal with. One is Nita Patton. Do you remember? Does that Patton name sound familiar? She's the sister of George Patton. In 1917, he's introduced to Patton's sister by George, and they strike up a relationship, and he actually becomes engaged to Nita Patton by the end of 1917. But that just at the time he's called to war in France, and the passions go out while he's away for 3 years, and they call off the engagement, and he regretted that the rest of his life. He always said that Nita Patton was the love of his life, and he always regretted not being able to consummate their relationship. Instead, he moved on, as we said, to Micheline Resco. They carry on correspondence and obviously carry on a romantic relationship throughout the 1920s and 1930s. She's 34 years younger than him, so he's doing a Bill Belichick, if you know that. She's 34 years younger than him, but she's a Catholic and he's an Episcopalian, and I think that has something to do with why they never really officially get together until 1946 when he marries her. He marries Micheline Resco and leaves her as his widow when he dies in 1948. Now, that well and truly does bring us to the end of our story. So let's celebrate General Pershing's life with a wonderful cocktail. And what better than the Blackjack? This is sort of a twist on a whiskey sour. Well, here we go. It's half an ounce of Cointreau, It's half an ounce of lemon juice. It's half an ounce of Kahlua, so we're introducing some coffee into this. And it's 1.5 ounces of Scotch whiskey. Because we've got lemon juice in this, got to shake it, not stir it, remember? So in a cocktail shaker, fill it with ice, shake for 15 or 20 seconds so that we get we've got to get it cold and we've got to get it diluted. Then strain into a chilled coupe glass, our favorite, that's the 1930s champagne glass. Strain into that coupe glass, garnish it with a twist of lemon, and enjoy your Blackjack cocktail, all right? So like and subscribe. It's important for the development of the channel. And we'll see you again next week with another slice of American history. Take care, everybody.